Greetings, this is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we're going to be taking a look at the July 1925 issue of Weird Tales. It again features a cover by Brosnatch in which we see a man on a sleigh being attacked by wolves. I'll assume they're wolves because I'm looking at the title of the cover story, which is The Werewolf of Ponkert. Let us go into the issue and see what there is to see. As usual, we have a table of contents. This one features 16 stories, another one of the articles on the Salem witch hunts. There's a poem, a sonnet to be specific, and of course at the very end we have the Eyrie. And the first story is the cover story, The Werewolf of Ponkert by H. Warner Munn. This is a written account, and it's claimed that this is the only written account of a werewolf dictated by the werewolf himself. We then see the story of this rather well-to-do merchant who will have an encounter with werewolves. He will kill one of them, but be wounded in the process and be turned into one himself. The leader of the pack tells him there must be 7, and since he killed one, he has to take his place. There is some discord in the pack, part of which he is responsible for. And during this dispute, his wife and child, who don't know he's been turned into a werewolf, will be killed. To take his revenge, he will give himself up to the authorities, tell everything he knows, and help entrap his former pack. I really enjoyed this story. It's well told. It's a good mix of action and suspense horror. The only thing that weakens it is the prologue, which could have been done away with. It's a typical thing where the writer doesn't trust the audience to understand what's going on as it's being revealed, and so feels there's a need to explain what happened, which is never good for a story, in my opinion. And it's followed by The Death Cure by Paul S. Powers, in which 2 drug addicts decide to break into a doctor's office to acquire what they feel they desperately need. However, the doctor is there working on some experiment. He will agree to give them the drugs they want as long as they do his bidding. He is doing experiments on death and revival. Along with the drugs, he gave them a poison, and the first revival does work, but the revived person is not very appreciative and will throw the doctor out the window. And of course, the second man does not get revived at all. This was disappointing. It didn't quite manage to maintain suspense. Next is Farthingale's Poppy by Eli Colter. This is about a group of friends, one of whom passed away recently in mysterious circumstances. He was found lying quite calmly on his lawn with no sign of struggle, no poison in his body, or anything like that. And this is basically a discussion that the friends are having, one of whom is trying to convince the others that he is still alive because he's been investigating mystical arts from the East and doing out of body experiences and so on. Some strange happenings will convince them to try to bring him back to his body, which conveniently has not been buried or cremated or embalmed. It's just been put in a coffin in a vault above ground. So they will get the body and try to call his spirit back and succeed. I'm not in love with this kind of story, and I found it a bit of a slog. Maybe it'll do more for others, but it didn't do much for me. The next story is The Sudden Death of Luke A. Lucas by Harold E. Somerville. This is a short piece where a small town lawyer gets told by a friend that there's a rumor going around that he was dead. For the 2 pages of the story, they just go from one person to the next trying to find out who started this rumor. And it all turns out that the doctor made a joke, which somebody took seriously. This story made me think of the Norman Rockwell cover, The Gossips. It's kind of funny in a way. It's lighthearted, but it's not so funny that it's memorable either. So there's really not much to say about this one. And it's followed by The White Queen of the Corolans by Arthur Thatcher. This is a fairly standard adventure tale. Two men are shipwrecked somewhere off the coast of Africa and trying to find their way back to civilization. They come across these groups of people who live in some city that was built by some ancient and now long gone civilization. It's competently told. The action is moving along at a really good pace. It's quite the page turner. It's just not memorable, so far at least, because of course it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, and we will find out what happens next in the next issue. And meanwhile, we'll move on to the next story called The Plant Thing by R.G. Macready. And this is about a journalist who is tasked by his editor to go investigate this professor who some people say he must be doing experiments on animals, and the professor in question does not accept visitors. And so the journalist, after ringing the doorbell and being turned away essentially, will climb over the fence that surrounds the estate, go walking around hoping to meet up with the professor and get an interview somehow. However, he is attacked by a plant that seems to be carnivorous. He is injured, and of course, the professor's beautiful daughter will nurse him back to health, and he will find out about this plant that the professor has created. However, one of the professor's men believes that the professor doesn't realize just how dangerous this plant is. Something does go wrong, and luckily, the manservant's foresight saves the day. I quite like this. We've seen many stories of carnivorous plants before or since. The description of it is quite striking. And the next story is The Red Lily by John Lee Mahin Jr. So this concerns an old man and his son who live in a small village. They live on the edge of town. They're not the most social, but people do gossip about them, saying how the son is a bad seed and talking ill of them. He will, along with other boys his age, go off to the war, but he'll be the only one to not come back. During a ceremony where a monument is being erected in their honor, the father loses his temper, seeing what he perceives as the hypocrisy that the villagers display. From then on, he basically doesn't talk to people. He has a greenhouse built, bringing in workmen from a nearby town. Eventually, some of the villagers inquire with them and stuff, find out that his plan is to grow red lilies. Also, during this time, he stops working in the town, although at irregular intervals he takes a train out of town. Where to, nobody knows. It turns out he got a job as executioner for a nearby prison. His job is to basically flick the switch for an electric chair. He will come across a newspaper showing a photo of one of the men he killed. And it turns out it's his son, who hadn't died in the war, but apparently lost his memory and turned to a life of crime. And then the father will kill himself. It's a rather grim story. Another one of those weird tales where what makes it weird is the odd coincidence and nothing more, no supernatural element or anything like that. And it's followed by The Unnamable by H.P. Lovecraft. I have done a reading of this one. I'll put a link up. I quite enjoyed it. The narrator is a writer who has published some stories apparently in Whisper magazine, clearly horror type stories. It's kind of unusual for Lovecraft to insert a character so similar to what the reading public must have perceived of him at the time. While it is outside the Cthulhu mythos, it does call upon similar things. It is a minor Lovecraft, but it is quite good. And it's followed by The Wonderful Thing, a dream story by Henry S. Whitehead. A much lighter tale, very different from the rest of the magazine in general. And this is the story of a man who has a very vivid dream where he goes to a house to meet a woman to whom he appears to be engaged. Then he wakes up. He is not engaged to anyone, but a few weeks later, he decides to go on a ride, gets to that house, and sees the woman he saw in his dream, and it turns out she also dreamt of him. And the story ends as he's invited into the house by the girl's parents for supper. A story with some supernatural elements to it, but ones that bring about a happy ending, which is pleasant sometimes to see in a magazine that has so many grim stories as Weird Tale does. And it's followed by Fidel Bassin by W.J. Stamper. This tale is set in Haiti and concerns a captain who is in charge of a lot of prisoners, and he does not have the resources to take care of them properly, even though he keeps asking for them. And then he is ordered to march these prisoners to the capital, and he knows most of them will never survive the trip. These prisoners are apparently sympathizers with a group that is revolting against the government, and the captain, in disgust, will quit and go join the rebels. Meanwhile, his sergeant, who dreams of one day being a captain and is expecting a commission soon, takes over, doesn't care about the lost lives, and is quite heartless. As things escalate, he will die and be condemned to live and die in the conditions of the prisoners he had taken charge of. And the tale concludes as the old captain, seeing what happened to his former sergeant, mentions that he had told him he would never become a captain. The story is quite grim, but it's fairly good if you like the sort of thing that it goes for. The next tale is The Stranger from Kurdistan by E. Hoffmann Price. I did a reading of this story. I'll put a link up for it. It feels at first like another story of some Satanist cult, but rather than just play it for horror, he approaches the religious aspect of it quite seriously, which makes it quite interesting. The only criticism I would give of it is the little preface, which I feel is completely superfluous. Another excellent story by E. Hoffmann Price. And it's followed by part two of Hurled into the Infinite by J. Schlossel. As you may recall, in this one, the hero had been cast on another planet along with the woman he loves and a stranger who had kidnapped her. He will fight him, be left unconscious, and when he wakes up, he finds he's been left alone. But he does find a clue that's been left on the way to go to follow her captors, which he does. Eventually, they figure out that the group that sent them to this planet with psychic powers auto hypnotize themselves, and all these geniuses were too dumb to put a stop to their hypnotism. They basically did not put a condition of once the people have been sent, we will come out of our hypnotism. So they're still in a trance, which prevents anyone from being able to go back to Earth. And what they will do is befriend some locals, teach them how to use more advanced technology because they're kind of like Stone Age level. They will also train them in using their hypnotic powers in order to send them back to Earth. And because they train more of them than the 50 men in this society that they'd encountered on Earth, they will be able to overpower the force that keeps pushing them towards this planet. I felt like the first part was very disconnected. It couldn't decide quite what it was. This one, too, it keeps moving along quite quickly from one thing to the next, and it feels a little bit disconnected. The stakes also don't feel very engaging. So a little bit disappointed on this one. But it's followed by Spear and Fang by Robert E. Howard. And this is Howard's first appearance in the pages of Weird Tales with a paleo fantasy. It's not as accomplished as later Howard stories, but it's still very well told. The action is well paced. The conflict between different people is well done. The society they're in is sketched out in a few sentences, but it's done very clearly. We know what the stakes are. I really enjoyed this one. And it's followed by a weird story reprint, the first one, which is The Three Low Masses by Alphonse Daudet. I've done a reading of this and I will put a link up in the description. I quite enjoyed this one, and to be honest, It's one of many stories in a book by French writer Alphonse Daudet called Lettres de mon moulin, Letters from my mill. Some of them are fantastical, like this one. Others are more prosaic and concern people as industrialization was changing their lives. I read this as a kid. It's something I think a lot of French speakers have read when they're kids. For me, anyway, it brought back a lot of memories from when I was younger, and I quite enjoyed it, and it's a very good story. I'm happy that Weird Tales is working at getting people to discover writings they may not know otherwise. It's followed by The End of the Horror, which is the fifth installment of Seabury Quinn's Servants of Satan articles on the Salem witch hunts. This one concerns itself mostly with the end of the witch hunt, the last few people who were accused and who fought back against the accusations. It also touches on the consequences, or one could argue lack thereof, these people who accused others of witchcraft, leading to terrible consequences. Some of them did not lead a very happy life afterwards, but that is really not much of a consequence for what they have done. Following which we have The Dream of Death by Elwood F. Pierce. In this story, a psychologist who rents a room in order to be able to work away from distractions finds that he apparently has some sort of psychic link with a mentally disabled person who works in the boarding house where he rooms. So if he asks, I would need Gus to bring me some firewood, then shortly after, firewood is brought up. He does a few experiments like it to see if it's really true, and things come to a head when he has a nightmare of this man killing him, upon which his quote unquote wish is fulfilled. An interesting twist on this kind of story. I didn't really see the end coming, though once it's arrived, you do feel that the whole story's been leading to this. It just didn't make it very obvious, which was quite enjoyable. After it, there's a short poem called The Conqueror by Adrian Pordelorrar. I have a short video of this and I will link to it. We then have Clay Covered Justice by Jan Dirk. A British administrator is trying to resolve the problem of some murders that seem to have been committed by one of his compatriots. He finds out that one of the native authorities has captured the man. He does try to take custody of him, but it is too late. The locals have already enacted their own punishment. One of the conclusions of the story is the native leader just says, he won't have me punished for having done what I have done. His report to those across the sea will simply mention that the matter has been dealt with. Then we find out that the father of one of the victims had molded a clay Buddha around her body, and the Buddha's finger pointed accusingly at anyone standing in front of it. And finally, we have the Eyrie, which goes over several letters commenting on stories published in the last few issues, also teasing a few things that will be in the upcoming issues. So, a fairly standard conclusion to this issue. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, looking at the July 1925 issue of Weird Tales.